Hello, scholars, and welcome to Unit 3 in English 130, Literature and Composition. So today's lesson will focus on imagery and how imagery works in poetry. So before we begin today's lesson, I want to take a few minutes and engage you in a quick little activity to get you thinking about how imagery works. So here we go. So for this first activity, I want you to think about this question. What do you visualize in your mind when you read the following sentence? Okay, so here it is. I want you to visualize in your mind what you see. Think about what you see as you read the sentence. The field of yellow flowers was really big. Okay, so here's the second sentence. The sea of bright yellow flowers flowed beautifully in front of me. Okay, so hopefully you got to visualize something that looks a little bit like this. Okay? Now, thinking about this image, I want you to think about which one of these statements helped you visualize it a little bit more. Do you think it was the first one or the second one? Okay. All right. So here is another little exercise, okay? Another example of how imagery works. So what do you visualize in your mind when you read this following sentence? The cheeseburger was very delicious. Okay, so here is the second sentence. The big, juicy burger with its melted cheese and red tomatoes made my mouth water and my stomach grumble. All right, think about what you visualize. And hopefully, again, it's something like this. Okay? And just like we did before, with the sea of yellow flowers, I want you to think about which statement helped you visualize it more. Was it this first one? The cheeseburger was very delicious? Or a second one? The big, juicy burger and my stomach grumbled. All right. So, what is imagery? So, this is kind of an example of what imagery is. Imagery refers to the mental pictures or visualizations that readers experience when reading literature. So, it has like a mental picture, a painting that goes on someone's mind when they're reading a description. So, imagery also appeals directly to one or more of the five senses. All right, so if we're thinking about the big juicy burger, we're thinking about what it tastes like, right? And what we see, the colors of the color of the tomato or the melted cheese, and also thinking about the flowers. You see all the flowers, an abundance of flowers in front of you, an abundance of yellow. So that's the sense of sight. An author achieves imagery through the use of carefully selected words as well. So if we're thinking about that one incident with the burger, right? The big juicy burger, we're describing a little bit more. It's a little bit more descriptive, and it helps to paint that picture a little bit better in the reader's mind of what this burger looks like. You could straight up say a cheeseburger was very delicious, but we don't really know what's making it delicious. What about it looks delicious or is making it taste delicious or smell delicious? Okay? All right. With that being said, there are five types of imagery that go along with the five senses. So we have visual imagery, okay? So it's based on what the reader could see, based on what you write. Auditory, so it's like what you hear. Kinesthetic, so like what you could touch with your hands, like you could physically touch with your hands, okay? Kinesthetic, which relates to what you could touch or feel. The olfactory, which is what you could smell. It's a sense of smell. And also the gustatory, which is what you taste. All right. So here are some examples of imagery using the five senses. All right, so I'll begin with the visual. So our visual says, the silver moon swam amongst the sea of stars. So we could picture the silver moon, the moon up in the sky, with the abundance of stars up in the sky, in the night sky. Auditory, the trees danced as the wind whistled gently through the leaves. All right. The wind is whistling through the leaves. I could sense like a little bit of autumn there. Or even like in springtime when it's a little windy out, the wind is rustling through the branches. All right. Kinesthetic, which is touching. John shivered as a cold fist gripped his heart when he heard the bad news. All right. So I get a sense of like something, like a sense of nervousness or anxiety when the coldness touched his heart. So you could get a sense of like how he felt. All right. Olfactory. Okay, the sense of smell. The stench of the crusty old sneakers overpowered my nose. I could get the idea of it being really stinky and gross. Degustatory, which is the taste. So Amber's mouth pierced at the taste of the lemon. So as we know, lemons are very tart, they're very sour. So definitely Amber's mouth pierced because of the taste of the lemon. And you could sense that and you could visualize it in your mind how that went. All right. So in addition to that, here's how imagery works in poetry. So just like painters, right? Poets are really talented and they're really gifted at painting images in the reader's mind. So painters choose from a palette of colors to create textures and moods for the works, where poets also have a palette and they have a palette of words. They use words for their art to express themselves. They choose just the right words to create a sensory experience for the reader. And imagery is also part of the poet's style and product of the poet's own way of seeing the world. It's also a reflection of the time and place in which the poet lives. So here is a little excerpt of a poem called The Shell by James Stephens. And while I read this out loud to you, I would like for you to close your eyes and imagine the scene he describes. All right, here we go. And straightway, like a bell, came low and clear the slow, sad murmur of the distant seas. And in the hush of waters was the sound of pebbles rolling round, forever rolling with a hollow sound, and bubbling seaweeds as the waters go swish to and fro, their long, cold tentacles of slimy gray. Okay. Now you can open your eyes if you've closed them. Okay. So thinking about imagery, I could get a lot of sense of herring while reading this poem. Some examples of herring is the bell. Bell makes a noise, and they're describing the sound that they hear in the seas as the bell, being loud like a bell, but also low and daunting. So low and clear, and also I could sense the slow bell, the bell ringing slowly, and just like the murmur of this distant seas. And by that, I'm going to assume they're talking about the waves, the sound of the waves, comparing the sound of the waves to the bell. And the murmur of the distant seas. The hush of the waters, so it's almost like the swooshing sound of the waves was the sound of pebbles rolling round. That's definitely a sound. The hollow sound and the bubbling. Okay. More sense of hearing. I hear swish to and fro. And okay, there's also sense of sight that I see here as well. One sense of sight is that I could see the seaweeds. They're describing the seaweeds so well. It's a bubbling seaweed, so it's making a sound. To and fro, so going back and forth. I could see it going back and forth. And I could tell you that the seaweeds are also described as being very long and almost like tentacles, like thinking about like a squid or octopus. And gray as well. Gray is helping me visualize in my head that the seaweeds are very long. They're going back and forth, and they're almost like tentacles, like almost like on a squid or octopus, and they are also very gray. I can also see the sense of touch here as well. When it comes to those seaweeds, I can see that there is a sense of coldness, that the seaweed is very cold, and it's also very slimy. And I get that picture kind of like when I visualize this. So thinking about the waves in the back and close to the shoreline here is all the seaweed and all the seaweed that's floating in the water as well. So poets also use imagery to speak to our deepest feelings. Some of our feelings, usually poetry covers joy, sorrow, wonder, and even love. Those are the most common themes. And it also emphasizes certain qualities of the subject. So if you're writing about the sea, it emphasizes, like in our last poem, it emphasizes the waves and the seaweed that usually occurs as a result of the algae in the ocean. And it also sets a mood. It creates a mood. Thinking about this poem, this little excerpt from Carl Sandburg's poem Babyface, out on the land, white moon shines and glimmers against gnarled shadows, all silver to slow twisted shadows, falling across the long road that runs from the house. So that's an example of how imagery could set a mood. And that's kind of like what I get from it, describing the moon in the clouds. All right, so here's another really good example of how imagery can be used in poetry. So this is the loon. Again, I will read this out loud and then we'll talk a little bit more about that. How imagery plays a role in this. A lonely lake, a lonely shore, a lone pine leaning on the moon. All night the water beating wings of a solitary loon. With mournful wail, from dusk to dawn, he gibbered at the taunting stars, a hermit soul gone raving mad and beating at his bars. Okay, let's unpack this. Imagery. All right, so when it comes to imagery, I want you to think about what mood does the poet create throughout this poem. The mood. Okay, what mood? I'm thinking about words like lonely, lone, night, solitary, mournful, wail, taunting. I definitely could get a sense of stillness, loneliness, and sorrow based on those words that are being used. It sets a mood of stillness, loneliness, and sorrow. So going again, how does the imagery affect your own emotions as a reader? I could tell you right now, for me, I feel sad when I visualize in my mind the desolate scene, so like the lonely scene, and hear the bird struggling all alone. Okay, thinking about those words again, like lonely, lone, nighttime, solitary, mournful, wail, taunting. I could sense that this bird is lonely. And this is an image I got for that. Okay, it's kind of like what visualizes in my mind, the bird being alone near a lake with the moon and just trees. Okay, so thank you. That is all for today. So I did post on here because I didn't last time, and I wanted to make sure that you have that. Here is my email address if you have any further questions on imagery, if you need a little bit further help. Here are my office hours. Monday 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. and also Friday 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. I'm going to ask that if you do office hours, if you could please email me ahead of time, and that way we could set up an appointment and we could have, if you would prefer, a private little meeting so that I could give you a personal collaborate link so that no one else could have it, so we could talk about it a little bit more. Unless you'd prefer we talk as a group, you could let me know that way, and I'll make sure that there are other people in there as well. But if you do, like I said, if you would prefer a private conversation about imagery, please let me know that in the email. Okay, so that is all I have for today.